Another grouping of 48 Starlink internet satellites soared into orbit Wednesday from Cape Canaveral aboard a Falcon 9 rocket, or what SpaceX's launch director jokingly called an American broomstick in a jab at Russian space chief Dmitry Rogozin. With a burst of steam and rocket exhaust, the Falcon 9 fired its Merlin 1D engines and began a vertical climb away from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station at 8:45 and 10 seconds AM EST, 1345:10 GMT, Wednesday. The booming blastoff began SpaceX's second Starlink mission in 6 days, and the company's 10th flight since January 1, keeping pace with a planned launch cadence of 1 mission per week this year. In the final minute of the countdown, SpaceX's launch director, Julia Black, announced her final authorization for the mission. Time to let the American broomstick fly and hear the sound of freedom. The SpaceX launch director told her flight controllers as the countdown neared zero. LDS go for launch. She was referring to comments last week from Russian space chief Dmitry Rogozin, who halted sales and service of Russian rocket engines to U.S. companies in the wake of sanctions imposed after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He tweeted, "Let them fly on something else, they're broomsticks, I don't know what." Falcon 9 rockets, including the engines, are built at SpaceX's plant in Hawthorne, California, as are the cargo and Crew Dragon spacecraft that carry supplies and astronauts to the International Space Station. SpaceX founder Elon Musk immediately responded to Rogozin by calling his all-American rockets American broomsticks. Russia has severed commercial ties with Western commercial space operations, although both NASA and Roscosmos, the Russian space agency Rogozin heads, continue, for now, joint operations aboard the International Space Station. Starlink satellites are designed to eventually provide internet access to any point on the planet using thousands of small laser-linked satellites to relay data to and from relatively small antennas and transceivers on the ground. In response to pleas from Ukrainian leaders, Musk activated Starlink internet service and shipped antennas and receivers to the embattled country, along with warnings about avoiding Russian jamming or worse. They tweeted at Elon, "And so we turned it on," SpaceX President Gwynne Shotwell said during a March 7 talk at the California Institute of Technology. "That was our permission," she said, according to Space News. It was a tweet. She said activating service was the right thing to do, providing a source of unfiltered news in the midst of Russia's ongoing invasion. "I think the best way to uphold democracies is to make sure we all understand what the truth is." Wednesday's mission, designated Starlink 4-10, mimicked SpaceX's recent Starlink launches from Florida's Space Coast. The Falcon 9 rocket, powered by 9 Merlin 1D engines, steered southeast from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Arcing over the Atlantic Ocean, the rocket's first stage booster turned off its main engines and separated from the Falcon 9's upper stage at T++2 minutes, 34 seconds. While the second stage powered into orbit with the 48 Starlink satellites, the first stage came back to Earth for a landing on SpaceX's drone ship, a short fall of gravitas parked in the Atlantic northeast of the Bahamas. The reusable booster notched its fourth launch into space. The rocket, tail number B1052, flew its first 2 missions as a side booster on SpaceX's Falcon Heavy rocket. After a conversion effort, SpaceX flew the booster again as the first stage of a Falcon 9 rocket January 31 with an Italian radar remote sensing satellite. With the rocket's 4th mission in the books, the vessel will return the booster to Port Canaveral for offloading and refurbishment before another mission. The second stage shut down nearly 9 minutes into the mission after reaching a parking orbit. Following a 48-minute coast halfway around the world, the Falcon 9 relit its second stage engine for a 1-second burn to place the Starlink satellites into the proper orbit for deployment. The Falcon 9 released the flat-packed satellites, each weighing about a quarter ton, nearly 66 minutes after launch. The rocket's guidance computer targeted an orbit ranging between 189 miles and 197 miles, 305 by 317 kilometers, in altitude, with an inclination of 53.2 degrees to the equator. SpaceX confirmed the successful deployment of the 48 satellites after the rocket passed in range of a ground tracking station in Alaska. The separation occurred while the rocket was a communications blackout. The Starlink satellites will extend solar arrays and use onboard ion thrusters to reach their operational orbit at an altitude of 335 miles, 540 kilometers, where they will enter commercial service for SpaceX. The fresh satellites deployed Wednesday brought the total number of Starlink spacecraft launched by SpaceX to 2,282. But some of those have failed or have been decommissioned. SpaceX surpassed 2,000 operating Starlink satellites with Wednesday's mission. That's more than quadruple the number of satellites currently flying in the second-largest fleet of spacecraft, the Internet constellation owned by Starlink rival OneWeb. In third place is Planet, which operates a fleet of more than 200 small Earth imaging satellites. The launch Wednesday was the 40th Falcon 9 flight to carry Starlink satellites as a primary payload. SpaceX is in the midst of launching around 4,400 Starlink satellites into 5 orbital shells more than 300 miles above Earth. The shells are positioned at different inclinations, and SpaceX completed launches of the first of the 5 Starlink groups last May. Ultimately, SpaceX intends to launch as many as 42,000 Internet satellites. The final figure hinges on market demand for the Starlink service, which offers high-speed, low-latency connectivity. SpaceX says the service is best suited for customers in remote, hard-to-reach areas, such as rural communities, isolated homes, islands, and ships. SpaceX has also partnered with the U.S. military to demonstrate Starlink connectivity to airplanes. Users in Ukraine are also relying on the Starlink network to provide independent access to the Internet during Russia's military invasion of the country. SpaceX turned on service to Ukraine in late February, and shipped a batch of Starlink user terminals to Ukraine days after the invasion started, responding to a request from Ukraine's Vice Prime Minister. Elon Musk, SpaceX's founder and CEO, tweeted March 4 that SpaceX is reprioritizing efforts to emphasize cyber defense and overcoming signal jamming. Some Starlink terminals near conflict areas were being jammed for several hours at a time, Musk tweeted. Our latest software update bypasses the jamming. Without elaborating, he said the reprioritization will cause slight delays in SpaceX's Starship heavy-lift rocket program, a fully reusable launch vehicle in development ferry massive cargo and humans into deep space. The effort will also cause slight delays in Starlink V2, the next generation of Starlink satellites designed to launch on Starship. But the Falcon 9 launch schedule continues unchanged. Another Starlink mission is scheduled to launch from Cape Canaveral no earlier than March 18.